My name is Megan, and at 34 years old, I thought I knew what love looked like. Standing in that upscale restaurant on our fifth wedding anniversary, surrounded by both our families, I never imagined my carefully constructed world would crumble in front of 20 people. Ryan had been different lately, his comments sharper, his patience thinner. But I told myself it was just work stress. Marriage has its seasons, right? Before I share what happened that changed everything, let me ask where you're watching from. If you've ever felt diminished by someone who promised to love you, please like and subscribe, because this story might resonate with you. I met Ryan 6 years ago at a charity gala for childhood literacy. He was everything I thought I wanted in a partner. Tall, confident, working as a financial analyst at a prestigious firm downtown. When he approached me at the silent auction table, his smile was disarming. He bid on every item I showed interest in later, admitting he just wanted an excuse to keep talking to me. Those early days were intoxicating. He would send flowers to my office twice a week, each bouquet with handwritten notes that made my coworkers swoon. He remembered every small detail I shared, from my favorite coffee order to my mother's maiden name. His family seemed perfect too. Eleanor, his mother, was this elegant widow who had taught literature at the State University for 30 years before retiring. The first time I met her, she embraced me warmly and said I had kind eyes. She had this way of making you feel seen, really seen, not just looked at. His younger sister, Jennifer, was equally welcoming, though she lived in London, working for an international marketing firm. We would video chat monthly, and she would joke about stealing me away from Ryan if he ever messed up. My own parents were different. Dad worked construction for 40 years until his back gave out, and Mom ran a small alteration shop from our garage. They were good, honest people who loved me fiercely, but around Ryan's family they seemed to shrink. Dad would fumble with his tie, and Mom would apologize for her modest jewelry. I told them repeatedly that Eleanor wasn't like that she never judged, but the class difference hung in the air like morning fog. 3 years into our relationship, Ryan got promoted to senior analyst. The celebration dinner he planned was elaborate, but halfway through he dropped a bomb. The promotion required longer hours, international travel, and someone who could handle the social aspects of executive life. He suggested so casually it seemed rehearsed that I should consider stepping back from my role as marketing director at the nonprofit I loved. Just temporarily, he assured me. Just until things settled. I loved my job. I had built the entire marketing department from scratch, taking the organization from local obscurity to national recognition. But Ryan painted this picture of our future, of the life we could build if we played our cards right. He talked about the house in the suburbs, the vacations to Europe, the children who would want for nothing. And somehow his vision became mine. I submitted my resignation letter the following week, my boss practically begging me to reconsider. The first year was actually good. I threw myself into supporting Ryan's career, hosting dinner parties, attending corporate events, being the perfect partner he needed me to be. But slowly things shifted. It started with small comments about my cooking. I had made his favorite pasta dish, the one his grandmother taught me, and he pushed the plate away, saying I had obviously forgotten the oregano. I hadn't. Then came observations about my appearance. Had I considered highlighting my hair, maybe trying a new gym routine? Nothing cruel. Just suggestions wrapped in concern. The last 3 months had been different, though. The comments became public. At his company picnic, he laughed about my inability to understand his work, even though I had an MBA. At his cousin's wedding, he interrupted my conversation with the bride to correct my pronunciation of the wine region we had visited on our honeymoon. Each incident was small enough that calling it out seemed petty, but together they formed a pattern I couldn't ignore. When our 5th anniversary approached, Ryan insisted on celebrating at the Meridian, the most exclusive restaurant in the city. He wanted both families there, some close friends, making it an event. I suggested something smaller, more intimate, but he waved me off. This was a milestone, he said. It deserved proper recognition. He handled all the arrangements, even selecting my dress, a black cocktail number that he said was sophisticated without trying too hard. The morning of our anniversary, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror trying to see myself through his eyes. The dress was beautiful, but felt like a costume. When I suggested wearing the pearl necklace my grandmother left me, Ryan laughed. Not mockingly, but that soft pitying laugh that had become so familiar. The pearls were sweet, he said, but didn't I want to wear the diamond pendant he bought me last Christmas? The one that actually caught the light, I wore the diamonds. The meridian was even more intimidating than I remembered. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns on white tablecloths, and the waitstaff moved with choreographed precision. Ryan had reserved the private dining room, its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city lights. He was already there when I arrived, having gone early to check every detail. He kissed my cheek, murmured that I looked presentable, then turned to greet the first guests. Eleanor arrived carrying a gift wrapped in silver paper, with a handwritten card tucked under the ribbon. She wore a navy dress that managed to be both modest and elegant, her silver hair styled in the same soft waves she had worn since I met her. She hugged me tightly, whispering that I looked beautiful, truly beautiful. Her warmth felt like armor against the cold anxiety creeping up my spine. My parents came next, Dad in the suit we bought for my wedding, Mom clutching a new purse she had obviously bought for the occasion. They looked around the room with wide eyes, and I saw Ryan's jaw tighten slightly. I rushed over, linking arms with both of them, trying to bridge the gap between their world and this one. Mom complimented the flowers, and Dad made a joke about the number of forks at each place setting. Ryan's smile was fixed, professional. His business partners arrived in a cluster. Mark and Stephen with their wives, all of them looking like they had stepped from the same catalog. The wives, both named Ashley oddly enough, immediately began discussing their recent trip to the Hamptons. I tried to join the conversation, mentioning a bed and breakfast Ryan and I had visited there, but my voice seemed to dissolve into the ambient classical music. More people filtered in. Ryan's cousins from Connecticut, some family friends, a few carefully selected colleagues. The room filled with the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter. Ryan was in his element, working the room like a politician, his hand occasionally finding the small of my back to position me for photos. The first course arrived, and Ryan stood to make a toast. He spoke eloquently about journey and partnership, about building something meaningful together. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt a flutter of hope. Maybe I had been imagining things. Maybe the stress of his job had been affecting us both, and tonight would mark a fresh start. But as we settled into dinner, the familiar pattern emerged. When I ordered the salmon, Ryan chuckled and told the waiter I was trying to be healthy for once. When I reached for the breadbasket, he moved it slightly out of reach, patting my hand like you would a child caught reaching for cookies. The others were too engaged in their own conversations to notice, except Eleanor. I caught her watching, her expression unreadable. The conversation turned to careers, each person sharing recent accomplishments. Mark had just closed a major acquisition. Stephen's wife Ashley was launching a jewelry line. When the attention turned to me, I brightened, eager to contribute something meaningful. I had been volunteering with a literacy program in the inner city, teaching adults to read. The work filled me with purpose in a way my old job never had. I started explaining our recent breakthrough with a student who had just read his first complete book at age 47. Ryan's laugh cut through my words like a blade. Not cruel exactly, but dismissive, patronizing. He turned to Mark and said, "Megan thinks teaching adults their ABCs is like running a Fortune 500 company. She gets very passionate about her little projects." The word little hung in the air. I saw Eleanor's fingers tighten on her wine glass. My mother looked down at her plate. The conversation stuttered, then Mark's wife jumped in with a story about their renovation, and the moment passed. But the damage was done. I felt myself shrinking, becoming smaller in my chair. As the evening progressed, Ryan's comments accumulated like paper cuts. When I mispronounced the name of a French dish, he corrected me loudly, then explained to the table that I had never quite mastered languages despite my best efforts. When I laughed at Stephen's joke, he said my sense of humor was delightfully simple. When the discussion turned to current events, he answered for me, explaining that I preferred to focus on lighter topics. Each comment was delivered with a smile wrapped in the appearance of affection. But I saw the truth in the uncomfortable shifts around the table, the way Jennifer's face appeared frozen on the video call Ryan had set up so she could join from London. Even the Ashleys had stopped their chatter, sensing something dark moving beneath the surface of our celebration. The main course arrived with fanfare, the waiter describing each element of the sophisticated plating. My salmon was perfectly cooked, but my appetite had evaporated. I moved the food around my plate, trying to participate in conversations while avoiding Ryan's increasingly critical gaze. Then he noticed I wasn't eating. He announced to the entire table that I was probably full from the snacks I had eaten while getting ready. Then, with that same poisonous smile, he added that I had been trying to lose the same 20 pounds for 3 years now. Maybe if I actually committed to something for once, I would see results. He said it like he was sharing an inside joke, expecting others to laugh along. Nobody laughed. My father's face turned red. My mother reached under the table to squeeze my knee. Eleanor set down her fork with deliberate precision. But Ryan didn't notice or didn't care. He was already launching into another story, this one about the time I tried to help with his presentation and confused revenue with profit margins in front of his entire team. The stories kept coming, each one designed to diminish me a little more. The time I got lost driving to a restaurant we had been to multiple times. The way I cried at a commercial about dogs. How I once tried to start an online business selling handmade jewelry but gave up after 2 months. He painted me as flighty, emotional, incompetent, all while maintaining that veneer of affectionate teasing. Then came the worst one. He started telling everyone about what he called my failed business venture. But it wasn't just any business. After leaving my marketing director position, I had tried to start a consulting firm to help small nonprofits with their outreach. I had poured my savings into it, worked 18-hour days, believed I could make a difference. It failed, not because I was incompetent, but because Ryan had sabotaged it. He had convinced me to turn down my first major client because the contract interfered with a vacation he had planned. He had insisted I skip a crucial conference because he needed me at a company dinner. He had slowly, methodically undermined every opportunity until I had no choice but to close the business. But that's not how he told it. In his version, I was the dilettante playing at entrepreneurship, unable to handle the basic demands of running a company. He described finding me crying over spreadsheets I couldn't understand, even though I had taught him how to read financial statements when we first met. He talked about the money wasted, conveniently omitting that most of it was my own inheritance from my grandmother. His laughter filled the room, loud and performative. He looked around, expecting others to join in his amusement at my expense. A few people smiled awkwardly, the kind of smile you wear when you're desperately uncomfortable but don't know how to escape. Most just stared at their plates. Jennifer's face on the screen had gone pale. Then he delivered what he clearly thought was the punchline. At least I make enough money that Megan can pursue her hobbies without worrying about actually succeeding at anything. She's lucky, really. No pressure, no expectations. Just playing house and pretending to change the world, one illiterate adult at a time. The words hit me like physical blows. Illiterate, playing house, pretending. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, my throat closing. I tried to hold them back, knowing crying would only prove his point about me being too emotional. But one escaped, rolling down my cheek and dropping onto the expensive tablecloth. Ryan noticed immediately. His voice took on that fake concern I had heard so many times. "Oh, look here, come the waterworks. I'm sorry, everyone. Megan gets so emotional sometimes. It's actually quite sweet once you get used to it. Maybe we should call it a night before she really gets going." That's when Eleanor stood up. The movement was so sudden, so decisive, that everyone turned to look at her. She placed her napkin on the table with careful precision, then fixed her gaze on her son. The warmth I had always seen in her eyes had been replaced by something harder, colder. The entire room held its breath. Eleanor commanded the room without raising her voice. She simply stood there, her presence filling the space with an authority I had never seen from her before. Her eyes never left Ryan's face as she began to speak, each word measured and deliberate. "Ryan, She began since you seem to enjoy sharing stories about failure and inadequacy. Perhaps I should share one of my own. Or rather, one of yours. The color started draining from Ryan's face. He opened his mouth, but Eleanor raised her hand slightly and he fell silent like a scolded child. Should I tell everyone about the trust fund your father left you, the one specifically designated for your future children's education, the $50,000 you lost in online poker before Megan even knew it existed, or would you prefer? I discuss how you begged me to bail you out, promising you would tell your wife everything, then never did. The room was absolutely silent. Even the waitstaff had frozen in place. I stared at Eleanor, then at Ryan, trying to process what I was hearing. $50,000. Gambling. Lies upon lies. Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. Or perhaps we should discuss your senior year at university. You remember, don't you, when you paid Timothy Harrison to write your thesis? When the professor found out and was going to have you expelled? Do you remember who went to the dean who called in 30 years of favors to keep you in school? Do you remember promising me you would earn your success honestly from that point forward? Ryan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Mark and Stephen exchanged glances, clearly recalculating their professional relationship with him. On the video screen, Jennifer had her hand over her mouth in shock. But Eleanor wasn't finished. Let's talk about your first job out of college. Not the story you tell about leaving for better opportunities, but the truth. About the complaint filed by your assistant for inappropriate comments and behavior. About how the company was going to terminate you until I personally spoke with the CEO, who happened to be my late husband's fraternity brother. About how you swore to me you would never disrespect a woman in the workplace again. Each revelation landed like a hammer blow. I felt physically sick. The man I had married had sacrificed my career for was a complete stranger. My parents were gripping each other's hands, my father looking like he wanted to leap across the table. Eleanor's voice dropped lower, but somehow became more devastating. But those are old failures, aren't they? Let's discuss something more recent. Should I tell everyone about the loan you took from Megan's retirement fund? The one you said was for emergency medical expenses for a friend? The friend who doesn't exist? The money that actually went to cover your trading losses? I gasped audibly. My retirement fund. The one my grandmother had started for me when I was born, that I had built throughout my career. Ryan had come to me 6 months ago, nearly in tears, saying his college roommate needed surgery and had no insurance. $30,000. I had given it without hesitation. Or Eleanor continued, her eyes now blazing. Should we discuss the investigation currently happening at your company? The one about expense account fraud. The discrepancies they found in your client entertainment reports. The investigation that would have already resulted in your termination if Megan hadn't personally called Patricia Winters in Human Resources, her contact from her nonprofit work, and negotiated a second chance for you. This was news to everyone, including me. I had called Patricia, yes, but only after Ryan came home in a panic saying there had been a misunderstanding about some receipts. He said it was an honest mistake, a new system he didn't understand. Patricia had been skeptical, but agreed to advocate for him based on my word, my reputation. Eleanor walked slowly around the table until she was standing behind my chair. She placed her hands gently on my shoulders, and I felt their warmth through the fabric of my dress. The saddest part, she said, addressing the room, but looking directly at Ryan, is that you had everything. A brilliant, kind, devoted wife who gave up her successful career to support yours. Parents who loved you despite your flaws. Opportunities that most people could only dream of. And instead of being grateful, instead of being humble, you chose to build yourself up by tearing her down. She squeezed my shoulders gently before continuing. A real man, the kind your father was, builds his wife up. He celebrates her successes, supports her dreams, and recognizes that her strength doesn't diminish his own. Only a coward, a deeply insecure little boy playing at being a man, needs to humiliate his wife to feel powerful. Ryan finally found his voice sputtering about misunderstandings and exaggerations. But Eleanor cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. Every single thing I've said tonight is documented. Every receipt, every email, every transcript. I've been keeping records since I first noticed you belittling Megan 2 years ago. I hoped you would grow out of it, would remember the values your father and I tried to instill in you. But instead, you've become something I barely recognize, something cruel. The final blow came with surgical precision. You laughed at Megan for being emotional, for crying. But emotions are what make us human, Ryan. The fact that she can still cry, still feel, after everything you've put her through shows her strength. The fact that you feel nothing but contempt for the woman who loves you shows your weakness. And everyone in this room can see it now. The silence that followed was deafening. Ryan's face had gone from pale to red to a sickly gray. His hands were shaking visibly. He looked around the room for support, for anyone to take his side, but found only disgust, disappointment, and in my parents' case, barely controlled rage. Eleanor helped me to my feet, her touch gentle but firm. "We're leaving now," she announced to the room. "Please enjoy the rest of your meals. The evening has been paid for in full, though I suspect some of you may have lost your appetites." As she guided me toward the door, she paused and looked back at Ryan one more time. "I'll be moving your things out of the house tomorrow. Megan will be staying with me tonight. Don't try to contact either of us until you've had time to think about the man you've become versus the man you could have been." We walked out together, Eleanor's arm around my waist, supporting me as my legs shook. Behind us, I heard the explosion of voices, the accusations, the questions. But none of it mattered anymore. All that mattered was the next step, and the one after that, each one taking me further from the nightmare my marriage had become. In Eleanor's Mercedes, I finally let myself fall apart completely. The tears came in waves, each one carrying a different emotion. Humiliation, relief, anger, grief. Eleanor drove in silence for a while, one hand on the wheel, the other holding mine across the console. Finally, she pulled into a quiet parking lot, overlooking the river, and turned off the engine. "Megan, sweetheart." "Look at me," she said softly. When I met her eyes, I saw they were also filled with tears. She pulled me into an embrace, and I sobbed into her shoulder like a child. She stroked my hair, murmuring comforting words, letting me release years of suppressed pain. When the tears finally slowed, she pulled back and cupped my face in her hands. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. None of this is your fault. Not one single bit." I started to protest, to list all the signs I should have seen, but she shook her head firmly. "Ryan learned long ago how to hide his true nature. He showed you exactly what you needed to see to fall in love with him. By the time his mask started slipping, you were already invested, already making excuses, already blaming yourself. That's what abusers do, Megan. They don't start with cruelty. They start with charm." She reached into her purse and pulled out a folder I hadn't noticed her carrying. She handed it to me with steady hands. Inside were documents, screenshots, bank records, emails. The evidence she had mentioned. 2 years of careful documentation. "I started doing this when I noticed the way you would flinch when he spoke at family dinners. The way you would look to him before expressing any opinion. The way your light seemed to dim a little more each time I saw you. I kept hoping I was wrong, that I was just being an overprotective mother. But mothers know, Megan. We always know. The bank records showed the pattern of Ryan's gambling, the mysterious transfers, the loans he had taken out in both our names without my knowledge. The emails revealed correspondence with multiple women, nothing physical as far as I could tell, but emotional affairs that would have devastated me to discover on my own. There were recordings, 2 videos Eleanor had taken at family gatherings where Ryan's treatment of me was subtle but unmistakable. "Why didn't you say something sooner?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. She sighed deeply. "Because you wouldn't have believed me. You would have defended him, chosen him, and I would have lost you both. I needed you to see it for yourself, and I needed to be ready with proof when that moment came. Tonight, when he humiliated you in front of everyone, when he took such pleasure in your pain, I knew it was time." My phone had been buzzing nonstop since we left the restaurant. Ryan's name appeared over and over. The messages alternated between rage and manipulation. "How dare you let my mother speak to me that way? Baby, please, we need to talk about this misunderstanding. You're overreacting as usual. I'm sorry you felt hurt, but you know how you get sometimes. The classic cycle I now recognized, but had been blind to for so long. Eleanor took my phone gently and blocked his number. Tomorrow we'll deal with the practical matters. Tonight you're safe. That's all that matters. When we arrived at Eleanor's house, my parents were already there. My mother had been crying mascara streaking her cheeks. My father looked older than I had ever seen him, the weight of his guilt at not protecting me etched in every line of his face. They embraced me together, and I felt like a little girl again, safe in their arms. Jennifer called from London, her face puffy from crying on the video screen. She apologized over and over for not being there, for not seeing what her brother had become. She offered to fly home immediately, but Eleanor convinced her to wait a few days until things settled. She did, however, make me promise to stay with her in London for a while once the divorce was finalized. A fresh start, she called it. The news of what happened spread quickly through Ryan's professional network. Mark and Stephen's wives, the Ashleys, had apparently live-streamed part of Eleanor's revelation on social media before anyone thought to stop them. By morning, the video had been shared hundreds of times. Ryan's carefully constructed professional image was crumbling in real time. That night, Eleanor made up the guest room with fresh lavender sheets and left a cup of chamomile tea on the nightstand. Before she left, she sat on the edge of the bed and took my hand. Tomorrow, Ryan will try to convince you this was all a mistake. He'll promise to change, go to therapy, do whatever it takes. He'll cry and beg and make you feel guilty for breaking up your marriage. But I need you to remember something. You didn't break anything, Megan. You can't break something that was already shattered. You're just finally stopping the pretense that it was whole. Despite everything, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying moments from our relationship, seeing them through this new lens. Every criticism disguised as concern. Every public embarrassment framed as a joke. Every dream of mine that mysteriously became impossible to pursue. The pattern was so clear now, like one of those optical illusions that once you see it, you can't unsee it. At 3 a.m, I made a decision. I would go back to the apartment in the morning. Not to reconcile, but to reclaim my space, my things, my life. Ryan would be the one to leave. I arrived at our apartment at 7 the next morning, Eleanor and my father flanking me like bodyguards. Ryan's car was in the garage, and I could see him through the kitchen window still wearing his clothes from the night before. He looked haggard, diminished somehow, as if Eleanor's truth-telling had physically shrunk him. When we entered, he immediately started his performance. Tears, apologies, promises of change. He blamed stress, alcohol, his childhood, everything except himself. He even tried to turn it around on Eleanor, claiming she had never accepted him, had always been looking for reasons to break us apart. The manipulation was so transparent now that I wondered how I had ever fallen for it. I didn't engage. I simply stated my terms. He would pack his belongings and leave within 2 hours. He would not contest the divorce. He would repay every cent he had stolen from my retirement fund. He would never contact me again except through lawyers. These weren't requests. They were requirements. He tried anger next, raising his voice, slamming his fist on the counter. My father stepped forward, and something in his expression made Ryan step back immediately. My father had never been a violent man, but in that moment his restraint was clearly hanging by a thread. Eleanor had already contacted her lawyer, Margaret Chen, who arrived while Ryan was packing. She was a small woman with kind eyes and a spine of steel. She laid out exactly how the divorce would proceed, what I was entitled to, and what would happen if Ryan didn't cooperate. The gambling debts, the fraudulent loans, the potential criminal charges for financial fraud, it all added up to a situation where Ryan had zero leverage. As Ryan loaded his suitcases into his car, he tried one last manipulation. He stood in the doorway looking broken and said that no one would ever love me the way he did. That I would regret this. That I was throwing away the best thing that ever happened to me. Eleanor stepped between us, her voice ice cold. You're right about one thing, Ryan. No one will ever love her the way you did. Thank God for that. The next weeks were a blur of legal proceedings and emotional processing. The investigation at Ryan's company accelerated after the restaurant incident became public. Turns out the expense fraud was just the tip of the iceberg. He had been insider trading using information gathered from client meetings. Patricia Winters called me personally to apologize for not seeing it sooner, and to thank me for my integrity in trying to help despite everything. Ryan was terminated with cause losing his bonuses, his stock options, everything. The gambling addiction that Eleanor had exposed ran deeper than even she knew. He owed money to some dangerous people, which explained his increasingly desperate behavior. His parents' trust fund, which should have been preserved for future grandchildren, was gone. The divorce proceeded quickly. Ryan, facing potential criminal charges and financial ruin, agreed to everything Margaret proposed. The apartment, the joint savings, even alimony for 2 years to compensate for my sacrificed career. It wasn't about the money, though, that certainly helped. It was about justice, about reclaiming what he had taken from me beyond just finances. I started therapy with a specialist in emotional abuse recovery. Dr. Sarah Brennan helped me understand the concept of coercive control, how abusers slowly reshape your reality until you can't trust your own perceptions. She helped me see that my empathy, my desire to see the best in people, wasn't a weakness Ryan had exploited, but a strength I could reclaim. My career resurrection began with a phone call from my former boss at the nonprofit. She had heard about everything and wanted to offer me my old position back with a promotion. But I surprised myself by declining. Instead, I proposed something different. A consulting arrangement where I would help them 3 days a week while building my own practice on the side. This time, no one could sabotage my dreams. The literacy program where I volunteered became my first major client. They hired me to develop a citywide campaign that would eventually triple their funding. My second client came through Patricia Winters, who recommended me to other nonprofits in her network. Within 3 months, I had more work than I could handle, and was hiring my first employee. Eleanor and I grew closer than I ever imagined possible. We had lunch every Wednesday at a small cafe downtown, where we talked about everything except Ryan. She shared stories about her late husband, about raising her children, about her own dreams deferred and reclaimed. She became not just a mother-in-law, but a true friend, a mentor, the mother I chose. My relationship with my own parents also transformed. Without Ryan's subtle classism poisoning our interactions, they flourished. My father started joining me for breakfast on Saturdays, and my mother taught me the quilting she had always wanted to share but thought I was too sophisticated to appreciate. I learned that they had seen Ryan's true nature early on, but kept quiet, thinking I would resent their interference. We promised each other no more silence in the face of wrong. Jennifer flew in from London every few months, each visit strengthening our bond. She told me things about Ryan's childhood that helped me understand without excusing his behavior. Their father's death when Ryan was 15 had affected him deeply. While Jennifer had processed her grief, Ryan had buried his, letting it metastasize into something toxic. 6 months after that horrible anniversary dinner, I ran into Mark's wife at a coffee shop. She apologized for not speaking up that night, for all the times she had seen Ryan belittle me, and said nothing. She told me that the incident had sparked conversations in their social circle about what they were tolerating in their own relationships. 2 other women had since left emotionally abusive partners inspired by my story. Ryan, meanwhile, spiraled. He moved back to his hometown to live with a distant aunt. The last I heard from Eleanor, he was working at a car rental agency and attending court-mandated therapy as part of a plea deal to avoid jail time for the financial crimes. She still loved him, she said, but love didn't mean enabling destruction. 1 year after that devastating anniversary dinner, I stood in front of 200 people at a women's empowerment conference telling my story. My voice was steady, clear, confident. The woman who had once shrunk from speaking in public now commanded the stage with presence I never knew I possessed. I talked about the subtle signs of emotional abuse, the slow erosion of self that makes you question your own worth. I shared the financial abuse that often accompanies emotional manipulation, urging women to maintain their financial independence, no matter how much they trust their partners. I spoke about the importance of keeping connections with family and friends, how isolation is an abuser's greatest tool. But mostly, I talked about recovery, about the incredible strength that emerges when you finally break free, about the community of survivors who understand without judgment, about the journey back to yourself, not to who you were before, but to who you were always meant to become. After my speech, a young woman approached me, tears streaming down her face. She said my story had given her the courage to examine her own relationship, to stop making excuses for behavior she knew was wrong. We exchanged numbers, and I became her informal mentor through her own journey to freedom. My consulting firm now employed 5 people, all women who had faced their own challenges and emerged stronger. We specialized in helping nonprofits tell their stories in ways that opened hearts and wallets. My client list included organizations fighting domestic violence, promoting literacy, supporting mental health. Work that mattered. Work that healed. Dating hadn't been on my radar until I met James at a fundraising gala 8 months after the divorce. He was a pediatric nurse, soft-spoken and genuinely kind. When he asked me to dinner, my first instinct was to decline. But Eleanor, who happened to be at the same event, whispered in my ear to give joy a chance. James was nothing like Ryan. He asked questions and actually listened to the answers. He celebrated my successes without feeling diminished. When I told him about my marriage, expecting him to run, he simply said that my survival showed my strength, and he felt honored to know me. We took things slowly, both of us carrying our own healing, but there was something beautiful in building trust brick by brick. Eleanor had started dating a retired professor named William, who made her laugh in a way I had never seen. Watching her bloom in this late-life romance reminded me that it's never too late to choose happiness. She still hosted family dinners, but now they were filled with warmth and genuine conversation, instead of the tension that Ryan had always brought. On what would have been my 6th wedding anniversary, instead of mourning, I celebrated. Eleanor, my parents. Jennifer, who flew in specially, and even James gathered at my new apartment, a space that was entirely mine. We toasted to survival, to growth, to the courage it takes to admit when something is broken beyond repair. Eleanor stood to make a toast, her eyes finding mine across the room. She spoke about the difference between breaking and breaking free, about how sometimes destruction is the first step toward creation. Then she said something that stays with me still. Megan, that night at the restaurant, I didn't just speak up for you. I spoke up for every woman who has been diminished by someone who claimed to love them. I spoke up for myself, for all the times I stayed silent when I should have roared. You gave me the courage to finally say enough. You saved yourself, but in doing so, you saved me too. The room was quiet for a moment, then my father raised his glass and said simply, "To the women who refuse to shrink." We all drank to that. Looking back now, I realize that Ryan's cruelty was actually a gift, though one wrapped in thorns. His public humiliation forced me to confront what I had been accepting in private for years. If he had kept his abuse subtle, contained, I might have spent decades slowly disappearing. Instead, his hubris, his need to perform his dominance, became his downfall. I think about the woman I was at 34, standing in that restaurant in a dress I didn't choose, wearing jewelry that wasn't mine, shrinking under the weight of someone else's insecurity. I want to reach back through time and tell her that this isn't the end of her story. It's the beginning. The literacy program student I had mentioned that night, the one who read his first book at 47, sent me a letter recently. He had just read his 10th book, was helping teach others to read. He wrote that learning to read had given him a voice he never knew he had. I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes Eleanor and I joke about that night, though the humor is dark. She calls it the anniversary dinner that actually honored the death of a marriage instead of celebrating it. She says Ryan gave us the gift of showing everyone exactly who he was, saving us the trouble of explanation. But there's truth in that joke. Ryan's laughter, meant to diminish me, became the catalyst for my liberation. His mother's words, delivered with such precision and power, didn't just silence him in that moment. They gave me permission to find my own voice again. These days, when I work with women escaping emotional abuse, I tell them about that night. Not just the pain of it, but the power that emerged from the ruins. I tell them about Eleanor, the mother-in-law, who chose justice over blood, who understood that real love sometimes means holding people accountable for their cruelty. I tell them about the importance of witnesses, how Mark and Stephen's wives sharing that video created a record that couldn't be denied or minimized. How my parents' visible anger validated that what I was experiencing was wrong. How even Jennifer, watching from thousands of miles away, became part of the chorus saying, "This is not acceptable." But mostly I tell them about the journey after. The hard work of rebuilding self-worth. The challenge of trusting again. The surprise of discovering that the person you become after trauma can be stronger, wiser, more compassionate than the person you were before. Not because trauma is good, but because surviving it reveals strength you never knew existed. Ryan tried to break me by laughing at my tears, mocking my emotions, belittling my achievements. He thought my sensitivity was weakness, my empathy was stupidity, my trust was naivety. But all those things he tried to destroy became the foundation of my new life. My sensitivity allows me to connect deeply with clients. My empathy helps me understand and serve others. My capacity to trust, rebuilt carefully, creates meaningful relationships. The last time I saw Ryan was at the final divorce hearing. He looked smaller, somehow depleted. The confident man who had commanded that anniversary dinner was gone, replaced by someone I hardly recognized. As we left the courthouse, he called my name. I turned, expecting one last manipulation, one final cruel word. Instead, he said quietly that Eleanor had been right about everything, that he had destroyed something beautiful because he couldn't stand feeling small, that he would regret it forever. I don't know if his remorse was genuine or just another performance, and honestly, it doesn't matter. His regrets are his to carry. As I write this sitting in my office surrounded by success I built myself, I think about the journey from that restaurant to here. The path wasn't straight or easy. There were nights I almost called Ryan, mornings I woke up wondering if I had overreacted, moments when the voice in my head sounded suspiciously like his, telling me I wasn't enough. But each day I chose to believe Eleanor's words over Ryan's. I chose to trust my therapist's guidance over my own self-doubt. I chose to accept love from friends and family instead of isolation. And slowly, choice by choice, I rebuilt not just my life, but my entire understanding of what I deserved. Sometimes love means holding on tight. But sometimes real love means letting go, even when that letting go involves public humiliation, family division, and starting over from scratch. Sometimes the most loving thing someone can do is stand up in a crowded restaurant and say, "Enough, your cruelty ends now." Eleanor taught me that. Not through gentle private conversations or subtle hints, but through an act of fierce public love that risked everything. She could have lost her son forever that night. Instead, she chose to save the woman her son was destroying, even if that woman hadn't yet realized she needed saving. That's the kind of love that transforms everything. The kind that sees injustice and speaks against it regardless of personal cost. The kind that values truth over comfort, protection over politeness. The kind that understands sometimes you have to break the silence, shatter the facade, and let the ugly truth scatter across the white tablecloth like spilled wine. Ryan's laughter that night was meant to be my humiliation. Instead, it became my liberation. Because sometimes it takes another woman's courage to remind us of our own worth. Eleanor didn't just silence my ex-husband that night. She gave me permission to reclaim my voice. And now I use it every day, not in whispers or apologies, but in my full, authentic power. The story I share at conferences and support groups always ends the same way. I tell them that if someone's love requires you to become smaller, quieter, less than you are, that isn't love. It's possession. Real love amplifies your voice, celebrates your growth, rejoices in your strength. Real love doesn't laugh at your tears. It holds you while you cry, then helps you stand when you're ready to fight back. I found that love not in my marriage but in its destruction. In a mother-in-law's fierce protection. in parents who finally felt free to show their anger, in a sister-in-law who offered sanctuary across an ocean, in friends who shared my story as a warning and inspiration, in my own voice, finally free to speak truth without fear. That anniversary dinner was supposed to celebrate 5 years of marriage. Instead, it marked the beginning of my actual life. The one where I laugh without permission, cry without shame, succeed without apology. The one where I am enough, have always been enough, will always be enough. And that's a story worth telling again and again until every person trapped in someone else's smallness finds the courage to stand up and reclaim their own magnificent space in this world. If you've experienced something similar, I want you to know you're not alone. Your feelings are valid, your pain is real, and your freedom is possible. What moment in your life made you realize you deserved better? Share your story in the comments below. If this message resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join our community of survivors and thrivers. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening to my story. May you find the courage to write your own ending, one where you are the hero you were always meant to be.